Hey, welcome to the show. My name is Mike Hatch, and I am your host, and I am so grateful that you joined us today. Man, as usual, we got a great show. This stuff is just pumping me up, man. I'm telling you, interviewing some incredible Christian business leaders here in Pittsburgh, and today is no different. We're going to be speaking with Darrin Grove, and before I introduce him, I just want to say thank you again for folks some of you who've already jumped on board to be ministry partners with us. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you. Thank you for our advertisers as well who are helping to defray the cost and pay for production. We're trying to raise $60,000 for this first year, which would get us through, obviously, this year of production and marketing and promotion. And we'd be so grateful. I would be so grateful if you chose to partner with us in that. You can go to our website if you want to download the podcast proposal, where I give you more details about the vision and mission and where our strategy for the future with this ministry. And you can also subscribe below. There's a link in the show notes. You can click to learn more about how to become a ministry partner or to subscribe to the podcast at $5 a month. So thank you for those who have, and if you're praying about it, man, we would so appreciate it if you decided to come alongside of us and help us in this mission. And so today we are speaking with Darrin Grove, who is the founder and CEO of Truefit. He is a native Pittsburgher with a passion for innovation, technology, and values-based leadership. Leveraging leadership and technology experience honed as the former head of IT for a recognized leader in manufacturing technologies, and recognizing the legacy of innovation in the Pittsburgh region, Darrin and his team made a commitment to establish and maintain headquarters in the region, even as Truefit added clients nationally and internationally. Darrin founded Truefit on the core values of being principled, collaborative, empowering, and serving the common good. In his capacity as CEO, Darrin champions these core values and applies them to each and every client and team member engagement. Darrin is another one of those incredible entrepreneurs here in Pittsburgh who've had such an impact, and so I'm really excited for you to hear from him. We talk about a little bit about his family background, some of the history of Pittsburgh, and how the steel industry rug pull affected his family. We talked about how he discovered God's plan and purpose for work and vocation and what that did to impact his career as an entrepreneur. He shares some great resources for you to develop your own theology in vocation and work. And then he shares some amazing insights and wisdom, especially for those of you who might be newer as entrepreneurs and trying to blaze the trail, as it were, here in Pittsburgh. All right, guys, let's get into it. Here is my interview with Darrin Grove. Hey, Darrin, welcome to the Redemptive Economics Podcast, man. I'm so grateful to have you, brother.
Hey, Mike. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Always a fun conversation when we sit down together.
It absolutely is, man. Whether it's here or Kelly O's or wherever we find ourselves, it is always, I love being around you, man. So I'm really excited for this conversation today. Let's start, if you don't mind, with a little bit about your background for those who might not know you. I think a lot of people in Pittsburgh do. You've had quite an impact in the Pittsburgh region, but I think, for those of you who might not know who Darrin is, share a little bit about your background and tie that in, if you could, maybe your faith background as well, and
Sure.
tie that in, if you would, in this really like having the scales fall off your eyes, maybe a way to describe it in terms of how you've begun to start seeing theology and work and vocation.
Yeah, thanks. I'm originally from Pittsburgh. I'm a native, born and raised. My family roots are very Pittsburgh-based. My grandfather worked in the steel mills, and my dad was a manufacturing guy. And so I come from good Pittsburgh blue-collar roots. So we're makers at heart, like I think in our family. We're makers at heart. For me, I discovered software development when I was a teenager, kind of at the entry point where software development was first possible. And so for me, making products, making things was all about software development. And a lot of my early work was in the manufacturing space. And so, kind of as the story unfolds, I think you'll see those themes coming about. My family was a Christian family. And so my faith goes back to my early days, my childhood. They had a very strong faith influence in my life. I would say as I went off to college, I started to wrestle with trying to bring those things together. How does my faith and my love for engineering and software development, how do those connect? And I was really wrestling through that because faith and science can be a topic that, I don't know, we don't talk a lot about that in the church. So I was trying to bring that all together in my early 20s, I would say. So at the time, I was dating Chris, who's now my wife, and her dad handed me a book that really connected all the dots for me. And that book was Creation Regained by Al Wolters.
Yes.
And this book, so we'll talk a lot about books today, but
Yeah.
Creation Regained really brought things together for me. It was the first time I was introduced to the framework creation, fall, redemption, restoration, which is kind of the arc of Scripture. Some people call it that. Some people call it the four themes of the biblical narrative. That was the first time I encountered that. And really understanding that the creation is very comprehensive in nature and includes everything that we've developed in culture and society. So it connected the dots for me. God created the universe, all the raw materials, and he created man in his image, but then, he gave us the mandate to fill the earth and subdue it and bring about all the potential that was inherent in the creation. And that includes all areas of culture and society. So for me, it was business. I was raised in a manufacturing family, like I said. So making things, that was all part of it.
And you said, I'm sorry, you said you have a background in engineering.
My undergrad was electrical engineering. Yeah.
Okay.
So but my, early days, my, passion was software development. And those two things are very connected, right? I was always doing software development. I studied electrical engineering. Early in my career, I had a passion for robotics, control systems, things like that. And in the manufacturing space, that all can come together. So early in my career, I was doing a little bit of process control. I was doing a lot of software development. And then my career eventually kind of moved in a software development direction, which is what I'm doing today. We'll get into that. Yeah. So I was wrestling through there. I had read Wolters and I started to read some other books, but it really connected the dots for me and, kind of made the case in a compelling way that God does care about engineering, and engineering is part of the creation. And engineering, like everything in the creation, is good, but it's also affected by the fall. Yeah. And Christ came to redeem that, and our job is to have a restorative impact in that area. So I was in my early 20s, and I was like, wow, this brings it all together, connects all the dots for me. But it was that book that was really the kind of central influence. And then a lot of other books flowed out of it. So if you want kind of the popular version, How Now Shall We Live by Chuck Colson. Oh, yeah. Great book. It's kind of the same creation, fall, redemption framework. And I actually was involved in what is now called the Colson Fellows, and got to study under Chuck Colson and learn from a lot of his faculty and a lot of other folks.
Oh, that's amazing.
In the Colson Fellows. So that was kind of an investment that my wife Chris and I made early on, and was formative for me.
And real quick, I want to go back for just a second. You meant just because you talked about engineering and redeeming engineering, because it's interesting to me, and I've heard this said by another MIT engineer grad. He talked about the fact that engineering is one of the most pure ethical professions. Because, and I love for those of you who are listening, he just smiled at me. I'm curious about what that smile is about, because it might be that there are ways that people distort it or do corrupt it, but it's at its core is very ethical, because you play by the rules of the immutable laws that God instituted in order to create things that don't fail, because it is all subject to the created order that God instituted. So whether it be a bridge, a building, a house, electricity in a house, whatever it is, you need to kind of abide by those rules, or else someone dies, or someone really gets hurt. Redemptive Economics is completely listener supported and dependent on the contributions of listeners. If you resonate with the message of Redemptive Economics and want to support the cause, there are 3 ways you can partner with us. The first is you can subscribe to the podcast for $5 a month and unlock all the amazing interviews and content without the interruption of advertisements. Secondly, you can donate to Redemptive Economics, either making a one-time gift or supporting monthly to help us offset the production costs and reach more people for the sake of the gospel. Lastly, if you're a business, you can choose to advertise with us. Right now, we're offering a limited number of spots for sponsorships for the first year at $150 per month or $1,800 for the year. I would be so grateful for your partnership. Check out the show notes for all the links that will lead to more information about how to support our mission to empower Christian entrepreneurs. So,
yeah, but that's kind of true everywhere, right? Like I wouldn't say engineering is more kind of purely ethical. I think, I would follow that creation, fall, redemption framework throughout all the areas of the world. I think everything has a created purpose and a created good in God's creation and intent. How is this thing working according to God's design? So whether that's engineering or whether it's education or whether it's medicine or some other,
you're
arts.
You're probably right. Maybe the consequences are a little bit more apparent, though. Maybe that's a way to say it.
Well, I mean, obviously engineers have to wrestle with the natural law and physics and things like that. You have to play by the rules, as you said. But I would just encourage everybody to think broadly, because everything is ethical. Everything is an ethical part of the creation, right? There is no
amen.
There's no neutrality, and a lot of people. This is a conversation that happens a lot in the current culture. There seems to be this kind of myth that there's neutrality, moral neutrality, or but every part of the creation has a particular design, and our job is to understand what that design is. What did God intend that to be? And then shape it to conform to that design. That's really what stewardship is. It's what sanctification and restoration is all about. It's about conforming everything in our world to the way God intended it and his design.
That's so well said. Yeah.
So you kind of have to, it's a fun thought exercise, but you could do it on any topic. You kind of have to kind of transport yourself back to the garden for a minute and say, okay, there was a time in which there wasn't sin. And if creation had played out without sin, then what would business have become? What would engineering have become? What would the arts have become? Like, what is its, and Wolters calls that structure. Wolters makes a distinction between structure and direction. The structure is, what was this thing created to be? What is God's design for it? And direction is, where's it pointed? Like, is it pointed towards God and redemptive purposes, or is it, are there dark forces and sin that's impacting it? And discerning structure and direction is actually turns out really, really important, because there's a good part of everything that's been created. We have to figure out what that is, figure out what God's design is. And then we have to look at where it's affected by sin and how do we try to restore it to its original design. So you can think of it in terms of like, okay, our job coming out of the creation is filling the earth, So what are the good things that need to be created, whether that's a software product or whether that's a manufactured product? What are the good things that need to be created? And then how is it affected by sin? So filling and fixing, that's our job, right?
Amen.
Filling the earth, creating all the things, bringing out its potential, but also now fixing, because we have to pay attention to where is the sinful parts of this, and how do we reverse the effects of sin and bring things back to the way God intended them to be. That's the exercise. If you kind of summed it up in like redemptive entrepreneurship into, I think one trajectory, I think that's it. And it applies everywhere. Like you can, no matter what your role is, no matter what God's called you to, no matter what your day job is, like you can ask those questions. What's this thing created to be? What's the created good of it? How has it been affected by sin? How can it be restored?
That's beautiful, man. So well said. Thank you for that, Darrin. That was amazing. All right. So I did distract us a little bit. You were talking about your journey up to that point. you got, I think, a little bit to college, or a little after college, maybe. You had read these books. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a Grove City guy, and Grove City's a rich place where this is reinforced all the time. I would encourage anybody to check out Grove City if you've got kids that are coming to college age. Grove City is a place where they teach these principles and they connect the dots, and it's an integrated. So Grove City was a great place to hang out and learn worldview, and for that to kind of begin to take root, I would say. And then early in my career, I had a very unique opportunity. It's interesting, when you look back and you see the hand of God in your life and you think, I have no idea why my journey took me to these places. And then you look back and you go like, oh, well, clearly God was orchestrating all this. It's a very unique experience. So the unique experience that I had was I got recruited by a manufacturing company here in Saxonburg called Penn United Technology. And Penn United is a tool and die shop. So they make progressive stamping dies, and they do stamping, and they do a lot of things. So pretty big. I think they're the second largest employer in Butler County. And it was founded by a guy named Carl Jones. And Carl, before anybody was talking about faith and work or connecting, faith in all of life, Carl was working that out. Like Carl was an early pioneer in this, and he hired me to run his technology. And so I got to learn very early on from guys that were a lot older, wiser than I am, how this stuff plays out. So they were thinking about, how does the fact that we're Christian affect how we treat our customers? How do we think about employees? How do we think about profit? So all of the aspects of business, they were coming at it from a Christian perspective. And I got to watch, like I got to, see this in action with guys that were literally working it out every day. And that was very formative for me. I kind of shaped the way I thought about things. And at one point this is our early 90s, probably 92. A lot of people will remember Jim Collins' book, Built to Last. And I read Built to Last. I'm a reader. You're going to get that idea, like a lifelong student. And I was reading Built to Last, and it talked about core values. And I was like, oh man, the core values of Penn United are so strong. Carl should write these things down, because I noticed that if you were close up and got to interact with Carl regularly, the values were really strong. But like, it was a big company, so the further you got away from the hub, we should write these values down. And Jim Collins made the point of that. And so I said, I encouraged Carl to write down the values. We did. And we went through a process. We interviewed like the original founders, the current leadership, the future leadership. I got to be a part of that process. Very formative. And we wrote down the values of Penn United. You can go to their website today and see the values that we articulated, but that were part of Penn United from the beginning. And one of them was that there was a whole Christian influence in that. So I forget the way we originally articulated it, but there's lines in there like, do what is right regardless of the cost. That's a Christian principle. We just talked about that. Do what is right means, conform this to the way it was created to be.
Right.
Regardless of the cost. That was, of all the values, that was under Christian principles at the time. I think they changed it to ethical principles later, but it was very clear that there were phrases like, we exist to glorify God in their values and things like that. Like, it was overtly Christian. That was awesome. Like, I got an opportunity to do that. And
I'm sorry, what was your role there at that point in time?
I was IT director. So I was responsible for all the software systems and the manufacturing systems that were kind of manufacturing automation and things like that. So
I just think it's cool. You weren't like HR or marketing or something like that. But that was still something I think God placed that burden on your heart to do, and you learned a ton from it. Wow. Yeah.
So in 1997, I had the opportunity to start Truefit, and it was just like, we had this vision, I had this vision, and there was a software company that I was working for, and I approached a good friend of mine, Dave Lane, and I said, hey, what if we kind of spin out and work to create software for you? So that was 1997, and so when we did that, I noticed that these values that I had learned at Penn United were really universal business values. It wasn't specific to being a manufacturing company. And so I pretty much adopted those values that I had learned. So if today, you kind of look at the Truefit website and you look at the Penn United website and hold the values side by side, you'd be like, oh yeah, I can see how, like Darrin just copied these, and I did. So that became the foundation on which we built the culture of Truefit. Like that was where that came from.
Seneca Hills Bible Camp and Retreat Center is a hidden gem located just north of Pittsburgh in Venango County. Personally, when I attended their men's weekend, I was blown away by the beauty of the surroundings, the quality of the facilities, and the superiority of the cuisine. This is not your typical camp food, folks. Seneca Hills hosts year-round retreats and conferences, but their true passion is summer camp, where campers, both kids and adults, escape the everyday tyranny of screens and distractions and immerse themselves in 250 acres of God's gorgeous creation. Go to SenecaHills.org or call my good buddy Executive Director Lyndon Fowler to learn more about how Seneca Hills Bible Camp and Retreat Center can help you, your kids, or your business create unforgettable memories, meaningful friendships, and a deeper understanding of God's love. That's amazing. To go through that exercise, to go through that exercise with Penn United, get the feedback and refine it and everything, and then bring it over to Truefit. What a cool opportunity, man. That's amazing.
Yeah. So that was unique. It was formative. And so when I was talking to people early on, I was 29 at the time, and when I was recruiting kind of my team, I would say, here's the values that we stand for. And some people were like, that's awesome, I want to join. And other people were like, not for me. And that's good. That's exactly what values should do.
Absolutely.
And I would say more than anything else, the values have shaped the culture. They've been very consistent. We kind of refined them at the 10-year mark, going through a transition. But if you looked at them side by side, you would, we didn't really change them. We just kind of consolidated some things and kind of applied them more to what we were learning. But fundamentally, they're the same. So our values we're in our 28th year now. And the values have been consistent since, day zero, basically. And in the values, one of the first things you'll see is the kind of nod to what I learned at Penn United was, our first value is that we're principled. And the first bullet under that is that we're grounded in a Christian worldview. And so we've chosen to be explicit. I don't think this is necessary for all business leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs, but we chose to be explicit about it. And that has, I think, been both inspiring and challenging at the same time. There are people who, are thinking about starting a career at Truefit, and when they read that in the website, they're, that's not something that everybody in our culture today thinks is a good thing. Yeah. And I think that's mostly because they misunderstand what it means. And so I do spend time. I remember a recruiter, one of our recruiters called me one day and said, okay, tell me about this, because I'm getting a lot of pushback on this Christian worldview thing. So then I unpacked it. I explained what it means. I explained, the goodness of God's creation and that software is part of that. And, I explained the whole picture. And I think it made sense. But when you just take it at face value, the term Christian is not well received everywhere. And I think as Christians, we need to be aware of that, not so that we're kind of hiding that, but that we're helping the brand. Right?
Absolutely.
So that we're saying, no. Like all these misconceptions you have about what the word Christian means a lot of them are not accurate. And so let me tell you what it means to me. And I had a guy, one of my employees, one time, he said he was not a believer. He kind of a professed atheist, not a believer. And he said, look, if there's anybody who's worried about this, have them talk to me, because I don't believe what you believe, but I love the fact that we create software products that make the world better.
Wow.
And so our faith was different, but the mission, we were on the same mission. Yeah. And I think that was actually a very interesting conversation that I had there, because, I think when people hear that, they think, does that mean we, are, crosses on the walls and they're going to push their faith on me and things like that. And that's not what actually happens. It's not what energizes it. It's not what inspires us. So
that's quite a testament to have an atheist affirm you in your explicitly Christian mission. Like that. Wow. That's amazing. I love that. So then clearly you helped us understand kind of how your journey of learning about faith and work and developing that theology for yourself, and then being at Penn United and figuring out the values there and taking that and then transmitting it then over to Truefit. And so again, if an atheist is affirming it, it's making a difference there. And I like also what you said. I think people sometimes are concerned, fearful, worried about putting that flag in the ground, and saying this is what we stand for, because they don't want to offend. They want to remain open and keep lines of communication open. And there's wisdom in how you do that. But I think more businesses should do that. But I do think you're right too, though. I think it depends on the business, whether you want to be, how explicit you want to be about it.
I think you can bake Christian values into a business without calling that out on your website. So that's just a choice that we've made. I don't think everybody needs to make that. I know a lot of guys who infuse or very kind of powerfully infuse Christian values into their work life, and nobody would know. It's not explicit.
Yeah.
So I should continue the story, because it's going to connect us to the economic part of this. So I had left Penn United, I started Truefit, and then I was like all by myself. And all these guys who I was used to hanging out with, so I thought, I need to connect with some places in the city. And this does get a little bit to your question of like, what advice would I give to Christian entrepreneurs? It was the first time that I had shown up downtown, and there was two guys I wanted to meet. One of them was Reed Carpenter, who was the founder of the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation. And I had heard that PLF was doing a lot to kind of help folks do this, think this way. And the other guy I wanted to meet was Fred Federoff, who was at the time the president of Alcoa. And there were stories in town about, Fred having a Bible on his desk. He was in this big, very influential organization in Pittsburgh, still is. Alcoa is. Fred's not with us anymore, unfortunately. But so I went to a conference where Reed was speaking, and I hunted him down and I invited him to lunch, and he actually introduced me, because Reed wasn't in Pittsburgh at that time, but he introduced me to the leadership of the PLF, and I got it connected to the PLF. And John Stalwart was the president of the PLF at that time, and that led to launching a program called the Leaders Collaborative, which was a collection of intentionally Christian leaders that still, you can still join that today. Lee Kreitcher is now the president of PLF, and the Leaders Collaborative is alive and well. But that program, I was in the first cohort, and there's relationships I have with other Christian leaders in the city that date back to being involved in that leadership cohort. And so in terms of like building a network of support and accountability, those guys are still part of my accountability and support network today. But I met them through PLF at the original Leaders Collaborative cohort. And then I chased down Fred Federoff, and at a talk he was giving on faith and work. Like, he was early pioneer as well. Invited him to lunch, and I didn't really realize the journey Fred was going to take me on, but he began mentoring me at that time and recruited me to a board that he was on for an urban Christian school, Imani Christian Academy. At the time, he gave a lot of his time and energy to Imani early on. So both of those kind of got me. I eventually joined the board of the PLF, and that got me involved and connected into the Christian community in the city. I guess what I would hope people take away from that is, getting connected to what's going on in the city. Pittsburgh is a rich town. I think the blue collar roots of Pittsburgh have values kind of soaked into it. And so it's not hard to find good Christian leaders in the city who are serious about their faith, that are having an impact in their business. Pittsburgh is pretty rich in that regard. But you do have to seek it. You do have to find, where those folks are. And you're doing a lot too. Thank you for the work you're doing to build that community. But I think Pittsburgh is a pretty easy place in some ways to be a Christian entrepreneur, because there is this rich ecosystem of believers that are in all areas of life, not just business, not just technology, but every area of life. And you can find these people. And I'm a big proponent of mentoring. I've really benefited by mentoring. I think people are pretty approachable in town. I mean, it's that kind of town. It's you can, if you invited somebody to lunch. I invited Fred to lunch. He's the president of Alcoa. He has no idea who I am, and he took a lunch with me. Like, that's a big deal.
That's so cool.
And it changed my life, like literally,
Yeah.
it set my life on a path. And I've had lots of mentors over the years, and I've had people that I've mentored. So I'm a big believer in mentoring. I think everybody ought to have find somebody who's further ahead in the journey that you can, that you can learn from, you can get that wisdom from. Find somebody who's like at your station, like in your role in other companies, and build a peer network around that. And then when people approach me and say, hey, I'd like to sit down and have coffee, I'd like to pick your brain about this, I'd like whatever, like I say yes if I can at all possible.
TBD Bookkeeping is who I use for my bookkeeping needs, and I'm thrilled to recommend them to you. As business owners with 3 kids themselves, Ryan and Danielle Hatch understand the value of time and the importance of work-life balance. TBD Bookkeeping can take over the day-to-day bookkeeping of your business so you can focus more on growth, operations, and customer relationships. I can speak from experience. If you're a business owner, you need a bookkeeper, and TBD Bookkeeping is simply the best in the business. Find their contact information in the show notes, and when you mention Redemptive Economics, you'll receive 10% off your first 3 months. Call TBD Bookkeeping today and learn more about the benefits I've experienced: more time, peace of mind, and the ability to plan for the future. That's huge. And I think you're right. I think most people, especially if they're Christian business leaders, I've noticed that too in Pittsburgh, are very willing, because honestly, not too many young leaders actually reach out to folks to be mentored. I mean, I think there's a gap there, and I think you saying this is very good. I want some of the young business leaders to hear what you just said. To take that step of faith and reach out, because sometimes I think this younger generation is in some ways expecting to be reached out to, and sometimes you've got to do the work to push out and to make that connection, and it's worth it.
Yeah, you need to own that path, like, for sure. Yeah. But I've found when I've reached out to people that it's a pretty friendly town, particularly in this world of Christian business leaders and things like that. So that network has been super helpful for me. There's a group of Christian CEOs, executive directors, business leaders that I have dinner with every month. And there's never a lack of topics to talk about. Like, there's always a problem of the day. There's always a challenge. But it's super helpful to have a group of other Christians. And I would say this is another thing I highly recommend: build a network of leaders who you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this, or this is my current challenge. And there's a lot you can learn. And there's great groups out there like Vistage and other things. Yeah. But when you have Christian leadership that you're listening to, it's a different ballgame. Like, that's going to not just teach you good principles of running an organization or leading or culture development or sales or whatever your challenge is, but it's going to come at it from a Christian perspective. And so I've really valued that all the years, and I really look forward to getting together every month for dinner with those guys.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good, man. Thank you for sharing that. I want to actually go back for just a moment, if you don't mind, and unless you've got another train of thought that you wanted to take us on, but I wanted to go back.
Lots of trains, Mike. I've lots of trains.
Just because, so I've been doing, in preparation for this show, I've been doing a lot of research on Pittsburgh's history and have really discovered some amazing people. Like, oh my gosh, George Westinghouse was incredible. And H.J. Heinz, oh my gosh. I always thought of, like Carnegie and Frick and Rockefeller, and was like, I don't like those people. They were not nice people. But then you've got these people like, like I said, Westinghouse, who I think in some ways embodied what you were talking about. They really cared for their employees. I think, who was it? Maybe it was Rockefeller, someone like that said, man, if if they could have made so much more money if they would have treated their employees worse, basically. But so anyway, I've done a lot of research and understanding the steel industry, and it's kind of, the way I describe it is a steel industry rug pull of Pittsburgh in like the, I guess, 60s, 70s, 80s. So my question to you is, do you remember that time frame in those 70s and 80s and what that, because I grew up, I was in the South Hills in the 80s, elementary school, giving away my age. And maybe I was just kind of, I was a kid. I wasn't aware. It didn't break into my world. I didn't see it a whole lot. But do you remember, because the tumult of that time?
I was pretty young during those years when kind of Pittsburgh was kind of searching for its renaissance,
Yeah,
if you will. Like it had come out of like I said, my grandfather was a steel worker. So my other grandfather was a trolley driver in town. My grandmother was a public school teacher in Pittsburgh public schools. So, I kind of grew up in that. And those were hard times. Like those, my family was poor. Like they didn't have a lot. So I come from humble roots. And then, being in technology, I really feel like, it's entrepreneurship and technology that has been a big part of the Renaissance that's brought Pittsburgh out of that.
Yeah.
Fueled a lot by our great universities here, CMU and Pitt, and those are bright spots in the Renaissance of Pittsburgh. You've got the Pittsburgh Tech Council and places like that are doing really, really good work to help the region transition. And I think to a large extent, that's been effective, and we've been a part of that. So it's been great to be a small part of that. We've had offices downtown for going on 9 years now. And so our original offices were in Cranberry. Through a series of steps, we ended up opening new offices downtown. So we've kind of had a front row seat to the central business district, and being a part of downtown through, I would say, a growth season, and then through a really tough time during COVID. And then now downtown's got some recovering to do. Coming out of that, it really has been, I would say, downtown has been slow to recover for a lot of reasons.
Because you said you started.
We've had a front row seat to that,
Yeah, you said you started Truefit in '97. Is that right? Gosh, okay. So you start Truefit.
Correct. Yeah.
And then boom, .com bubble bursts, and then 8 years later, global financial crisis, and then there are probably other things I'm missing, but then obviously you get to 2020, and you have seen a lot. Holy cow!
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
So it's, it was challenging. We had offices for 8 years in the Union Trust Building. The Union Trust Building in downtown Pittsburgh was a great example of somebody who, bought an iconic Pittsburgh building with beautiful architecture and just restored it. And the Davis companies have done a fantastic job restoring that building. We were kind of an early tenant in that phase. Man, what they've done to that space. But then, COVID hits and everything downtown, because downtown is so business centric, right? There's not a big residential, that's been growing, but it's not a big residential presence downtown. When the businesses all went remote, that's one of the big challenges I see today for downtown. So that's not a problem we've solved yet. It's just the next challenge. I find Pittsburghers, by the way, to be pretty resilient. So we've overcome a lot of challenges, and we'll overcome a lot of challenges again. Like, we don't give up on stuff. So I'm very confident that we'll kind of find our way through this. But I do think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of challenges to overcome, and I haven't seen a plan from city government that I believe will kind of really address that. So I'll just leave it there.
Amen, brother. That's why this podcast exists. I want to promote that, multitude of Christian entrepreneurs, descending upon this region and, making a redemptive impact. Jeff Doherty with Allstate Insurance has the distinction of being the very first sponsor of the Redemptive Economics podcast, and I couldn't be happier to promote his services. I've known Jeff for many years now, both as his pastor and friend, and man, I can say with confidence that he is a man of strong faith who aligns well with the Redemptive Economics values. So reach out to Jeff. He can offer you options for a wide variety of coverage and services. He's committed to helping Pittsburgh residents assess their immediate and long-term needs and choose options that will help you achieve your goals. When you want to explore options for protecting your home, personal property, or financial future, Jeff Doherty is your guy. You'll find Jeff's contact information in the show notes. Hey, go grab a cup of coffee with him, get to know him, even if it's just to review your current coverage in case you need to make adjustments. And I promise you're going to love Jeff every bit as much as I do.
I do have a crazy idea to share with city government if anybody is listening for that.
Okay.
So this is my I've been floating this around a little bit, but
you'll hear it here first, folks.
Having been downtown for 9 years now, and having traveled to several other cities, my suggestion to the city would be to buy up the parking garages and make them free. In other cities, especially people who are building retail centers and community centers, when you park, you don't pay. You just, if you go to Naples, Florida, if you go to Columbus, Ohio, you don't pay for parking. You just park, and then you get to enjoy whatever that little area of the city is. And I think one of the big pushbacks I get from employees who are making decisions every day about whether they're going to come downtown is, well, the parking's so expensive. Parking's prohibitive. There's not enough parking, so that's my crazy idea. I think the city should make public parking free downtown. And I think if they did that one thing, it would have a major impact because people would come downtown, you'd drop that barrier, and then retail can flourish and other things can flourish. So anyway, that's my one crazy idea. I'll stand behind that one.
I love it, Darrin. I love that idea. Well, and it's so my question actually was going to be, and you kind of offered, I guess in a sense, a solution or a part of the solution, but there's a lot of great things happening in Pittsburgh and in this region, a lot of great things. And I'm finding it out, as I'm interviewing folks. Yet we still have this stagnant population, not growth, not sometimes. I mean, we actually did have a decline in our population between 2010 and 2020 specifically. Why the heck are we having issues drawing people to this region? Is it the parking, Darrin?
No, I don't think it's the parking. It might have something to do with the weather. I don't know. There's some things that we can't do anything about. I agree with you that Pittsburgh's a great town and a great city. There's a lot of people focused on this problem of how do we retain talent? How do we keep people from universities here? And I'll just say, I think you're touching on a solution, which is there has to be a thriving business community in Pittsburgh to hire people, to have jobs. And so, reducing barriers for businesses to thrive in Pittsburgh, I think Pittsburgh has been and needs to continue to be very business friendly. I don't know that it always is. I think it's got, like I said, ground to make up for, bring people downtown. I think it will, but I think you got to have a focused effort. But, business is really what drives flourishing.
Absolutely.
That is, that's what drives the economy. That's what drives flourishing. And so we have to start businesses here. We have to hire we have to hire folks who want to work here, and we have to have that kind of commitment. That's the only path I see, really. There's great organizations like Innovation Works, which their whole mission is to grow jobs in our region. So I think they're very central to everything you're talking about with entrepreneurs and growing business, growing the economy here in Pittsburgh. But I think it has to be through thriving business that happens.
See, okay, I love that you said that. This is why I'm having you on. I love it, man. I love your perspective. I love your thoughtfulness and sincerity and your experience that God has taken you through to teach you these incredible things. What's frustrating to me is this mentality sometimes, and I was a pastor, so I guess I saw it in the church a good bit, Christians in general, that we're convinced, a lot of Christians, that we don't have the tolerance for risk, and therefore we can't be entrepreneurs. My argument is, though, I don't care who you are, you're an entrepreneur. Like, whether it be that you've got a garden in the back and you're taking the raw materials and creating and cultivating, or you're making dinner for your family and you're curating and gaining feedback about what works and what doesn't and refining that process. I mean, those are entrepreneurial processes. There's a frustration that I have at times that, man, I wish more Christians would take up that mantle of entrepreneurship, trust God, and step out in faith. Yeah, what are your thoughts and feelings on that?
Well, I tend to share your broad view of entrepreneurship. Like, I think you can find entrepreneurs in lots of different areas of life. Mm-hmm. Risk is something that we talk a lot about at Truefit because So let's talk a little bit, maybe some background on what Truefit does, and then it'll get back to your discussion of risk. Mm-hmm. So Truefit is a software development company. We work with business leaders who see an important problem that needs to be solved in the world. They know they need technology or software to solve that problem. Mm-hmm. Many of them, they may or may not have ever created a software product before. They may or may not be technical. They've never been on the journey. They don't necessarily have a software team. And we partner with them and we walk step by step from taking their idea, their concept, and turning it into a successful commercial product. That's the journey that we take with folks. And so when we meet those types of people, those business leaders, we're really meeting them very early in their product development journey, and that's at the point of maximum risk. So that's I didn't make that up. That's just product development risk 101. Yeah. And there's kind of 4 areas of risk that we pay attention to. So the value risk: do people want this solution? The usability risk: can they easily use it? Is it desirable? The feasibility risk: is it technically possible? And the viability risk, which is, can this make money? Like, is it a good business idea? Is there an ROI here? And so we educate people really early to pay attention to these risks. And then our entire process, which we call idea launch, is designed to work very quickly to reduce that risk. There's a lot of different ways to reduce that risk. Most of it is helping people understand the customers and users of their product to really sharpen their idea. So what you don't want to do if you're creating a new product is kind of rely on all of your own insights in order to create that product. What you really want to do is talk to a lot of customers and users and really learn what problems are they experiencing. What are the opportunities to create value? How are they solving a given problem today? Things like that. And so we help people who have good ideas really understand their customers, users, the market, the competitive landscape, things like that. And all of that is designed to reduce risk. And so what I tell, and I get to talk to, university students, and I've taught classes on this, but there's a wise way to take risks. It's not just about like, man, I wish people would get out there and just take more risks. Like, no, that's not very good advice.
Yep.
The better advice is, okay, learn what to do with risk. And we're combining these 2 things. Number 1, I talked about, which is like, get closer to your customers, users, and the market, and really understand what's going to create value for them.
Yep.
And then we help people work in an iterative fashion, in an agile fashion. Agile is kind of a software development term, but work iteratively, quickly, we often ask the question, what's the smallest thing we can create in order to in order for somebody to use this product and test product market fit? So we spend a lot of time thinking about that. And that's different than where people start with us. A lot of people come to us and we joke that, it's world domination, right? Like that's, they've got a big idea. They got big visions. Entrepreneurs have big visions. We love big visions, but we really help people start small, because that's a smart way to reduce risk. If you're building the smallest possible thing and testing it and getting feedback, rather than building this whole idea, I guarantee you that you will learn quicker. So that's the whole process is learn quicker. And Eric Ries wrote about this in the Lean Startup. He was kind of started the Lean Startup movement, and that's a very good and important book if you want to really learn about how to reduce risk. And he kind of popularized the term minimum viable product, or MVP. A lot of people know what that is. And so how do you create an MVP? How do you test the market? How do you learn from that? And what we've seen over 28 years and creating hundreds of commercial software products is the people that are doing it right never end up in the place that they thought they were going to be in the first place. So
that's great.
You learn and you pivot and you adjust and you make changes. And that is super key to reducing risk. So to all those folks who might be watching who say, yeah, I'm not really a risk taker, I don't know that. I would say there's a smart way, there's a wise way to take risk and manage the risk and mitigate the risk along the way. So you don't have to be afraid of risk. That's the whole point. The point is you don't have to be afraid of taking risks, because there's smart and wise ways to take the risks. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I got a cramp in my hand writing so hard and trying to keep up with what you were saying, Darrin. That was so good.
So we get to do this every day, and it's kind of a privilege. But think about this, because this is Christian stewardship.
Yes.
We are not we want to help people make the best investment of their resources that we can, right? Yeah. And so reducing risk and not taking unnecessary risk and figuring out what to do with risk is a part of that. And to the extent that we can learn quickly and help products be more successful and help people get a return on their investment, that is Christian stewardship. Everything else is, not a good use, not a wise use of resources. You gotta, as a Christian, you've got to say, what is God's given us, entrusted us with resources. How do we invest those? It's the parable of the talents, right?
Yeah.
It's parable of talents. So God gives me 10 talents and I need to turn that into 100 talents. But you can't do that if you're working with your own insights and not talking to the market and not working iteratively and building something that nobody wants. That's not the parable of the talents.
Right. There's got to be humility in that. I think so many people, unfortunately, and maybe this is why we have this negative view of entrepreneurship, it's all about, the motives are all about getting rich and wealthy and self-sovereignty. And meanwhile, in order to really be successful in a business, you've got to be humble. You've got to have a long, I call it it's been termed a low time preference, where, a horizon that's further out, that you're working with a longer time frame. And you have to be kind of plodding along. And I think of the scripture, do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge God, and He will direct your paths. And I heard that as you were saying, don't rely on your own knowledge and understanding of the market, your product, whatever. Be humble enough to know that God's going to guide it. And like you said, you're going to end up somewhere different than what you expected. That is just such a Christian thing to do. Truth at Work executive peer advisory groups are a life and business changing experience. Trust me, I've experienced it myself. It made such an impact on me that I stepped out to become a chapter president myself. At Truth at Work, we're dedicated to helping Christian business leaders who feel isolated and overwhelmed. Our community of like-minded peers are here to help leaders like you live out your faith in the marketplace and build your business on biblical principles. Christian business leaders are transformed through these peer advisory groups that apply biblical truth for living out our faith in all areas of life. If you'd like to learn more about Truth at Work, email me, Mike Hatch, at mhatch@truthatwork.org, or you can email my counterpart, Dave Hartman, at dhartman@truthatwork.org.
Yeah, for sure. And I that really does resonate, because we do run into a lot of folks who are very confident. A lot of entrepreneurs are very confident. A lot of entrepreneurs are very in love with their own ideas. And so we help them, I would say, learn humility early, right?
Yeah.
Try to learn it. I think most entrepreneurs are going to be humbled at some point. I've been humbled a lot
absolutely.
over my
Yes.
journey. I can say that. And so I think you're gonna learn humility the hard way or the easy way. We help people learn it the easy way, but develop a learning posture, right? Like, this is a continuous learning journey that you're on. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're making a new product.
Yeah, you've got to be selfless. You've got to be others-centered. You've got to be humble. You've got to be open.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I mentioned Eric Ries a minute ago. The lean startup, talks about the build, measure, learn cycle, right? So build something small, measure feedback, learn from that, and figure out what to build next, pivot or persevere.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of the book is not just, it's the speed through that cycle that is actually success, right? So learning quickly in small cycles is actually what allows you to reduce risk and be successful. So it's the speed of learning that is really key.
Yeah, I think it's those exceptional successes and failures that get put out there through the media and everything else, and people think, oh my gosh, I don't have the stomach for that. But it's like, again, it's that slow, humble plodding that nobody knows or sees often until way down the road, when something is finally kind of kicked in and you've met the needs of your customers in a way that becomes profitable, is proven out by the market. That takes time. It takes so much time. Okay, man, that's so good. Thank you, Darrin, for that. All right, so you kind of spoke to this already. I was going to ask, how do you see Christian entrepreneurs contributing redemptively to Pittsburgh's socioeconomic future? And maybe we can kind of combine this with the last question a little bit too, because I also want, you shared already some things, but maybe there's something else maybe you want to bring to the fore here. But what advice would you give to new Christian entrepreneurs? Yeah, so we'll just leave it at that. See what you have to say.
It has to start with building a great, successful business. So first of all, your first responsibility is, as an entrepreneur, is to your business, your customers, your employees. That's your first responsibility. I think a lot of times we're looking for, other areas that the main way you can contribute is to build a great business. Now, the way you do that Christianly is the creation, fall, redemption, restoration thing we talked about earlier, right? So understand, if I'm creating a product in healthcare, what's God's created design for healthcare? How has sin affected that? You got to kind of avoid that. We've seen all kinds of interesting product ideas over the years, as you can imagine, and not all technology, not all software ideas are good ideas. I think one of the things we wrestle with culturally around topics like social media is this healthy? It's like the way we're doing this, helping teenagers or whatever. Is this a healthy use of technology? Yeah. And so I think as Christian entrepreneurs, we need to be aware of that. Either we need to think through the redemptive purpose of that and say, okay, how do I apply this for good, right? How do I use my powers for good? So that's a thoughtful process. And we get to do that with clients who are all going on this journey. So we get to do it for ourselves, and we also get to do it for every client that we work with, which is awesome. But there are times when we say, we're not going to build that product because we think, that product is not going to make the world better. So we are selective about that, and we do pick and choose the products that we want to invest our time. Some products that we build take 4 months, 6 months for an initial release, and then could be a year or 2 years or 5 years that we're working on this thing. We don't want to invest that much of our lives into something unless it's really going to have a strong impact and make people's lives better. So make human flourishing. If it's part of the human flourishing project, that's really what we want to spend our time on. How do we make people's lives better? How can technology improve people's lives for the good? That's built right into our value system. Our last value is serving the common good. And so we think a lot about that, both externally for our clients and internally for our employees. You really got to think through your product from that standpoint. And then you also have to think about all the dimensions that way. So what do flourishing employees look like? How do I help my team to flourish? And I would say that's a particular challenge that we're wrestling with right now. I think coming out of COVID, we're all dealing with the effects of things like realities like remote work. And, we all used to be together, and that had certain dynamics, team dynamics. And one of the things we're asking ourselves is, we're not going back to everyone being in the office. So how do we recapture a lot of the cultural strength that we had back in our history, throughout our history? How do we recapture that, but in new ways, in the new world of remote work? How do we do that? And we're still wrestling through that. I would say we haven't figured that out yet. I think we have some ideas. I think there's some things that we could do differently, but that's not an easy problem to solve. And it takes, and thinking about it through a Christian lens can really help. How do we make sure that people are flourishing when they're working at their home office and not connected to people very much? So, that's current. That's a current challenge. So it is, A, build a successful business, but B, think about it through this redemptive lens that you're really talking a lot about unpacking with people. Yeah. The core product, focus on your core product and how does that product make the world better? What was, in God's creation, what is this thing designed to be? And then how might sin be affecting it? And how do I need to restore that particular thing to be more the way God created it to be? That's the key. And then thinking about every aspect of your business from that standpoint. Yeah. That's not easy to do, right? That's super hard. It's been a 28-year journey now, and I'm still, like I said, there's always things to figure out. Truefit has been through, it's been interesting. I've talked about this on other podcasts, but we've been through kind of 5 seasons now. Like each season of Truefit has been about 5 years long, 5 or 6 years long. And each one has had kind of its own challenges, its own mission that we've been trying to accomplish. And we didn't plan it out that way. That's just kind of the way it happened. But we're now entering season 6. And we're kind of at this new inflection point. We're kind of reinventing ourselves in some significant ways. And we're getting ready to launch the next season of life here at Truefit. So I'd say the other thing, maybe to take away, you got to be open to that kind of reinvention, rethinking what you're doing, continuing to improve, praying about stuff and listening to what God's telling you. I don't say I've been really good at that. I think I've been not really good at that, actually. I think it's taken me a long time to learn things. I think it's, I don't always listen very well to what the direction God's giving me, but he has a way of schooling me. It's not always pleasant. It's not very often painful. But I would say, we've talked a lot about the ingredients today. So thinking about your core product and team from through the lens of creation, fall, redemption, restoration, getting people plugged in, plugging yourself into the community, the Christian community of Pittsburgh. I didn't mention, we haven't talked much about church, but I think every Christian entrepreneur should be connected to a local church and be contributing. The local church needs Christian entrepreneurs to kind of unpack these connections, I'll say.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
A lot of times churches are, and I've been going to church my whole life. A lot of times churches care a lot about getting people saved and then getting them plugged into programs within the church. And I think that's those are important things, but they're necessary but not sufficient. And I think what we've tried to do is in our church is realize that our job is equipping people and sending them out to be missionaries where God's called them on mission in the city, in an area like education or business or technology or medicine or wherever God's called you, like you're a missionary in that. It could mean that you get to share the gospel with people, but it's not limited to that. It's about making that area of the creation more the way God designed it to be. And the church plays such an important role. And I think Christian entrepreneurs can help their churches realize that, look, God's called me to this thing, and I need your help, the church, to really develop that. And that's a journey that I've also been on. And there's several churches in town that really, I think, do a good job with that. And there's other churches that need to, like, they're more early in that journey, and have further to go.
Yeah, I love that. It's so good. You can, as a Christian entrepreneur, you can have a redemptive influence within your church by just being who you are, and helping to, as you alluded to, kind of educate them about what it's like to be a practitioner out there in the marketplace. And it's so interesting. Unfortunately, there's the thorns and thistles of this life that are seeking to sabotage our efforts, right, of a fallen world. And one of those is this, I feel like this influence from the culture to try to get us to be more passive. We worship and are addicted to comfort, and so that gets really tough, like, for, I think, a lot of Christians to kind of break out of that and decide to be proactive, to become, as you said, more a producer versus a consumer. And unfortunately, as a former pastor, I can tell you that a lot of churches have fallen into that category as well, appeasing the consumer, if you will, and unfortunately contributing to those negative effects in some ways. So wherever you are in church there, and whatever the unique tensions and challenges you're facing there within your church, man, I do agree with you, Darrin. I think as entrepreneurs, we can have an influence there.
Yeah, I think it starts really with explaining to, your pastor or to explain what you do, like help them understand, what God's called you to and what your day job is, and help them understand the unique challenges that you're facing, and ask them how to think about it in a Christian way. And this is on us as entrepreneurs, as, people who are working. We're all working. The members of the congregation, I think it's on us to say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I do. Help me do it more Christianly, more responsibly. And I think if we were having more of those conversations in church, I think it would be a richer dialogue. We try to do that, but too often we separate our lives into these compartments, right? Like, I got my professional life over here, and I've got my what I do on Sunday over here, and those are two separate things. And so I would say it starts with us connecting those dots and saying, no, God's called me to medicine or education or government. God's called me to this thing, and connecting those dots is, my faith is not something that I do on Sunday. My faith is something that I do every day. And then when you start to do that, you immediately run into very big challenges with how to do that, ethical dilemmas and things that are, and the church can be engaged to help you work through those, but only if you start those conversations.
Yes, because look, your pastors aren't necessarily they are entrepreneurial, but they aren't in the marketplace like you are. And I know for me as a former pastor, probably some of the most significant spiritual lessons I learned from other entrepreneurs, talking to them, learning about what they were doing in the marketplace, and understanding those unique challenges that they're facing. So don't discredit the value you bring as an entrepreneur within your church. I know sometimes you can feel like a little bit of an outsider, you don't fit as well within the church sometimes, but man, there are ways you can actually disciple your pastors, so that's great, man. Darrin, this has been so good, brother. I'm so grateful for the time you spent with us today. Any last minute thoughts you want to leave us with? Anything you feel like you didn't get to share? And then I also want to let people know where they can find you online. I don't know if you have much of an online presence or not, but where can folks follow you or find you?
I guess as a last word, and this has been thematic throughout, but you can tell that I love learning, and I'm a lifelong learner. There's so much that's been written on these topics. I think you've got to dig in. And I mentioned a couple books that were really formative to me. I'll mention a couple more. This is a really good book by, that not a lot of people know about this book, Why Business Matters to God by Jeff Van Duzer. This is an excellent book if you haven't read it. And then a lot of people probably have read Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller. And so, great book. But dig in. There's so many good resources out there. I would definitely encourage you to check out the Colson Center, the Colson Fellows. They're doing a lot of good work. I would, definitely encourage you to get involved. Like, talk to Mike about Truth at Work and what's going on in the city. Check out, what's going on with the Leaders Collaborative at PLF. So many good things happen in the city, but there's a lot of resources, I guess I would say, that are available to you. So there is no reason to walk this journey alone. This is a hard journey. Every day you'll face challenges. Every night you'll have trouble sleeping. I guarantee it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's very rewarding in many ways, but it's very difficult in many ways. And I would just say, learn as much as you can, and don't walk the path alone. That's my closing. You can check me out. You can find me easily on LinkedIn, Instagram. Our website is truefit.io, truefit.io. You can always reach out there. And my email is easy enough, dgrove@truefit.io. But hit me up on LinkedIn, connect. I'm happy to continue this conversation. You probably realize that I'm very passionate about this. This is part of calling for me. Like, having this conversation and helping other entrepreneurs in their journey is part of my calling. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, Mike. This has been a fun conversation for me. We've only scratched the surface of some topics, but there's just so much more to unpack. But
you'll be back. We'll have you back, Darrin. This is the first of many.
Okay, great. Well, it's been a privilege, and for anybody listening, if I can be helpful for you, let me know.
Cool. All right, Darrin. Thank you so much for being with us, brother. Let's get to work.